The meeting room had no windows. It had no need for them. The beings who sat inside it did not care for stars the way poets did. To them, stars were addresses, and some addresses needed to be removed from the map. The Galactic Dominion had existed for over 6,000 years. It was made up of more than 400 spacefaring species, spread across a wide arm of the Milky Way. They had built trade routes between suns, they had raised cities on frozen moons, they had done great things, and they had done terrible things, and they had told themselves that the terrible things were necessary. The hall where the council sat was massive. Hundreds of representatives filled the curved seats, their bodies shaped by different worlds, some tall and thin, some wide and low, some floating in tanks of liquid. They all had one thing in common. They were afraid of what they did not control. And right now, they were talking about Earth. A tall being named Counselor Drath stood at the center of the floor. His skin was dark gray and smooth. His 3 eyes moved slowly as he spoke. He was old, even by the standards of his people, and he had attended many meetings like this one. He did not enjoy them, but he believed in them. The species on the 3rd planet of the Sol system, he said, has shown consistent patterns of violent behavior, rapid technological growth, and an unusual resistance to environmental limits. They have been at war with each other for most of their recorded history. They now possess nuclear weapons. Our models show they will achieve basic warp capability within 40 years. He paused to let that number land. 40 years. In galactic terms, that was almost nothing. That was a blink. Our recommendation, Drath continued, is to mark the planet for preemptive removal before that threshold is reached. The vote was called. 312 voted in favor. 7 voted against. The rest abstained. Earth was marked. The Veil Khan Armada, the Dominion's extinction fleet, was given its mission. 6 months to reach the Sol system. Clean removal. No contact. No warning. No survivors. That was the protocol. That had always been the protocol. None of this was known to the humans. On Earth, life continued in its loud, messy, wonderful way. People argued about traffic and dinner and the meaning of things. Children played in the afternoon light. Old men sat on benches and watched the pigeons. The planet had no idea it had been sentenced. In a small radio telescope station in Ghana, a woman named Dr. Mara Osei was working late. She always worked late. Her desk was covered in printouts and cold cups of tea, and sticky notes written in 3 different colors. She had short hair and careful eyes, and a habit of talking to herself when she was thinking hard. Mara was a deep space radio astronomer. Her job was to listen. Most of what she heard was noise, the natural hiss and hum of the universe doing what universes do. But every now and then, something different came through. A pattern. A shape hiding inside the static. 3 weeks ago, she had found something. She had not told anyone yet. Not her team, not her department head, not the international board that oversaw her station. She wanted to be sure first. She wanted to understand it herself before the world came rushing in and took it from her. The signal was buried deep beneath the cosmic background radiation. It was not loud, it was not obvious, but it was there, and it was repeating, and it was mathematical. There was structure to it, a rhythm that did not belong to any natural process she had ever studied. She leaned back in her chair and stared at the waveform on her screen. It was not coming from outer space. That was the part that kept her up at night. She had checked the triangulation 4 times. She had rebuilt her analysis from scratch, twice. The numbers said the same thing every time. The signal was coming from below her feet. It was coming from the Earth itself. Mara pressed her fingers together and looked at the ceiling. The ceiling was plain and gray and offered no answers. She looked back at the screen. The signal pulsed quietly on the display, looping with a patience that felt almost alive. She did not know, sitting there in her small station with her cold tea and her careful eyes, that 6 months away, a fleet of warships was already moving toward her planet. She did not know that her world had been voted out of existence by creatures who had never met a single human being. She only knew that something was sending a signal from inside the Earth, and that it had been doing so for a very long time, and that it was waiting. She pulled her notepad close and started writing. The Veilcon Armada moved through deep space in tight formation. It was made up of 47 ships, each one many times larger than any vessel humans had ever imagined building. The fleet was commanded by Admiral Sovrath, a being from a world of cold oceans and long winters. He was not cruel. He did not enjoy what his fleet did, but he was thorough. He believed that order in the galaxy required hard choices, and that hard choices required someone willing to carry them out. He stood on the bridge of his command ship and looked at the star charts. The Sol system was a small yellow dot far ahead. Unremarkable. One of billions. He had done this 13 times before. He would not think about the 14th until it was done. His first officer approached and handed him a data tablet. 6 months at current speed, Admiral, barring any complications. There will be no complications, Sovrath said. There never are. He handed the tablet back and returned to looking at the stars. Far behind him, in the other direction, the 7 council members who had voted against the decision sat in their own quiet corners of the galaxy. Some of them filed formal protests that no one would read. One of them stared out a window at the stars and felt something that might have been shame. They all knew the vote was final. They all knew the protocol. They hoped, in the way beings hope for things they cannot change, that something unexpected would happen. Back on Earth, Mara made herself a fresh cup of tea, sat down, and began the slow work of decoding the signal. She had no idea that the unexpected thing was already beginning. She only knew the signal was there. It was old. It was patient. And tonight, for the first time, it felt like it was getting slightly louder. Mara brought in 3 people. She chose them carefully. The first was Dr. James Otieno, a geophysicist from Nairobi, who had spent 20 years studying the deep structure of the Earth's mantle. He was a quiet man who spoke slowly and thought quickly, and he had a gift for finding patterns in data that other people treated as background noise. The second was Dr. Priya Nair, a quantum physicist from Bangalore. She was younger than the others, sharp and fast, and she had a reputation for asking questions that made senior scientists uncomfortable. Mara liked that about her. The third was Dr. Henrik Larsson, a linguist from Copenhagen. He specialized in dead languages and ancient communication systems. He had once spent 4 years decoding a set of symbols from a collapsed Bronze Age civilization, only to discover they were a shopping list. He had laughed about it ever since. He was good at sitting with uncertainty. Mara showed them everything: the signal, the triangulation, the analysis she had run and rerun until her eyes hurt. They sat with it for a long time without speaking. "That's not geological," James said finally. "I've seen every kind of signal the Earth produces naturally. Seismic, magnetic, thermal. This is none of those things. The Earth doesn't make this." "But it's coming from inside the Earth," Priya said. "From inside the Earth," Mara confirmed. "Approximately 4,000 kilometers down, close to the boundary between the outer and inner core." Priya leaned forward. "That's not possible. No human technology has ever been placed that deep. Nothing could survive those conditions." "No human technology," Mara said, and let the sentence finish itself. The room was very quiet. Henrik was staring at the waveform on the screen. He had printed it out and was holding it with both hands, tilting it slightly, the way he tilted things when he was seeing something. "This structure," he said, "these groupings, they're not random. This is organized information. Whoever made this, whatever made this, was trying to communicate. They worked through the night, and the night after that, and the night after that. They slept on cots in the back room, and ate food from the small kitchen down the hall, and barely noticed when day turned to dark, and dark to day again. What they found changed everything. The signal was not just one signal. It was layered, like an onion made of mathematics, each layer more complex than the one before. The outermost layer was simple, almost childishly simple, as if designed to be recognized quickly by a basic intelligence. The layers beneath it grew harder, denser, richer. Priya was the one who cracked the second layer. She came out of the back room at 3 a.m, with wide eyes and a printout covered in handwritten notes. "It's using quantum encoding," she said. "Not anything we built, but the underlying principles are things we understand. It's like, imagine if someone wrote a letter in a language you don't speak, but they used an alphabet you recognize." "It's making itself readable to us," Henrik said. "It's been waiting for us to be ready to read it," Mara said. The deeper they went, the older it got. James ran a decay analysis on the energy patterns, and came back to the group looking pale. "The lower signal layers," he said carefully, "show characteristics consistent with an age of approximately 4 billion years. Nobody said anything for a moment. "That's almost as old as the planet," Priya said. "Yes," James said, "it is." It took them 11 days to understand the shape of what they had found. Not all the details, not even close to all the details, but the shape, the outline. The Earth was not simply a planet. It had not simply formed from dust and rock around a young sun, cooling slowly into the world of oceans and mountains and life that humans had always known. All of that was real. But underneath it, woven through the deepest structure of the planet, something placed there, deliberately, by hands, or whatever served as hands, that were not human. A vault, not a vault like a bank safe or a treasure chest. A vault in the truest sense, a place of keeping. A structure designed to hold things across enormous spans of time, safe from accident and war and the slow death of stars. And it was full. They could not yet see what was inside it. The deeper layers of the signal were still locked, still encoding themselves into a form their minds could parse. But the structure of the vault itself was becoming clear, and it was vast. Whatever was stored in it had been stored with tremendous care, by beings who understood that the universe was large and time was long, and most things, eventually, got lost. Henrik sat very still with his notebook open on his knee. "Someone built this," he said quietly. "Someone built this inside our planet, before there were fish, before there were trees, before there were humans." He paused. "They knew we were coming." "They didn't just know," Mara said. She was looking at a particular section of the signal she had been studying for 2 days. A section that kept returning to the same cluster of patterns. "They chose us. Whatever is in here, they left it for us specifically. The encoding, the layering, the way it has been slowly making itself readable as our understanding grew. This was not meant for the Dominion, or any other species out there." She looked around at the others. "It was meant for humans." None of them slept that night. Meanwhile, many light years away, the Dominion's advanced scout probe entered the outer edges of the Sol system. It was a small automated machine, sent ahead of the Armada to confirm the target and run a passive scan. Standard procedure. It had done this hundreds of times. It moved silently through the cold dark, past the giant outer planets, and sent its readings back without incident. But as it crossed the invisible boundary where the sun's magnetic field began to dominate, it passed close to the edge of something it did not expect. An energy field, ancient and deeply buried, that reacted to the probe's presence the way a sleeping thing reacts to a sound in the room. The vault noticed the probe, and it did what it had been built to do. It sent a handshake signal, a greeting, an announcement, the kind of signal that said, "I am here, I have been found, the waiting is over." The signal did not travel at the speed of light. It traveled faster, much faster. It went out in all directions at once, at a speed that had no name in any human language. And it reached every receiver capable of detecting it, across a wide portion of the galaxy, within hours. Mara's instruments screamed. Every sensor in the station spiked at once, and then went quiet again. She stared at the readings, and felt something shift in the air, as if a door had opened somewhere far below her feet. She did not know yet what had just happened, but she would find out very soon. The Dominion Council Chamber had seen many difficult moments in its long history. It had seen wars begin and end. It had seen species beg for mercy and be denied. It had seen quiet decisions made with great calm that caused enormous suffering far away. The beings who sat in its curved seats were experienced. They were composed. They did not panic easily. They panicked now. The handshake signal arrived during a routine session. The council was discussing trade disputes in a distant system when every communication device in the chamber went off at once. Screens lit up. Translators buzzed. Staff members came running through the doors with the particular expression of people who have just learned something they do not know how to say out loud. Counselor Drath stood slowly and looked at the data being projected on the main screen. He read it twice. He looked at the faces around him. He sat back down. The signal was architect frequency. That alone would have been enough to cause a stir. The architects were ancient, so ancient that most species in the Dominion knew them only from fragments, old texts, half-decoded carvings, whispered theories. They were the civilization that had come before everything else, the ones whose ruins were occasionally found on dead worlds, the ones who had, according to some accounts, deliberately seeded life across the galaxy before vanishing without explanation. No architect frequency signal had been detected in recorded history. And this one was not old. It was not a remnant or an echo. It was fresh. It had been triggered seconds ago, and it was not coming from a dead world or a forgotten ruin. It was coming from Earth. The chamber erupted. Voices in dozens of languages filled the air. Several beings stood. One representative from a water-breathing species was removed from their tank by their staff, who apparently felt the meeting required immediate physical presence. Counselor Drath raised his hand for order, and received very little. "Confirm the source," he said to his aide, quietly, under the noise. The aide's face was carefully still. "Confirmed, Counselor. The signal originated from the third planet of the Sol system, from deep within the planet's core. The signal is consistent with architect construction in all measurable parameters." Drath closed his eyes for a moment. The Sol system. The planet they had just voted to destroy. He opened his eyes. "Get me Admiral Sovrath." The Admiral received the news with the kind of stillness that comes from long experience with bad situations. He read the data on his screen. He looked at the star chart. He looked back at the data. Then he did something he had never done in 40 years of command. He stopped his fleet. 47 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel simultaneously. They hung in the dark between stars like a held breath. His first officer stood beside him without speaking. The bridge was quiet. Everyone was waiting. "If the vault is real," Sovrath said finally, thinking aloud, "and it is on that planet, then we cannot destroy the planet." He spoke slowly and clearly, as if explaining something simple. "If we destroy the vault by violence, the failsafe activates." The first officer said nothing. She had heard of the failsafe. Everyone in the Dominion military had heard of it. The theoretical last defense built into the vault, designed to release the architect's final weapon if the vault was ever attacked. No one knew what the weapon was. No one had ever been willing to test it. "Send a message to the council," Sovrath said. "Tell them we are holding position and awaiting new orders, and tell them we have a problem." Back in the council chamber, the three factions formed within hours. Not through any formal process, they simply emerged, the way sides always emerge when a crisis has no clear answer. The purists said to destroy the planet anyway. The risk of the failsafe was theoretical. The risk of a young, violent species accessing architect technology was real. Better to end it now and accept whatever came. The opportunists said to make contact, to negotiate. The vault's contents were worth more than any extinction protocol. If the humans could be managed, guided, controlled, brought into the Dominion under careful conditions, The vault could be shared on Dominion terms. The humans did not even know what they had yet. They could be directed. The fearful said to do nothing, to turn every ship around and leave the Sol system alone forever. The architects had chosen Earth for a reason. Beings who interfered with the architects' plans had a historical tendency to stop appearing in the historical record. The argument went on for hours. Then it went on for days. Representatives who had not spoken to each other in years were suddenly in constant communication. Old alliances bent, new ones formed. The Dominion, which had moved with cold efficiency just days ago, was now caught in something it had not experienced in a very long time. Genuine uncertainty. Outside the chamber, ordinary citizens of the Dominion's member species began to hear fragments of the news. Rumors spread faster than official communications, as they always do. On dozens of worlds, beings who had never thought about Earth looked it up for the first time and found a small blue planet with one large moon and a loud, complicated species living on its surface. Many of them felt something unexpected when they looked at the images. The oceans, the green patches of forest, the lights of cities at night, seen from above. They did not know what to make of it. On Earth, Mara's instruments were still reading the aftermath of the handshake signal. The spike had lasted only seconds, but the data it left behind was dense and strange. She was sitting with her team around a table covered in printouts when her satellite phone rang. It was the director of her funding organization, calling from Geneva. He sounded like a man who had been awake for a long time. "Mara," he said, "we are getting some very unusual readings from multiple deep space monitoring stations around the world. They seem to be related to a signal originating from your location. Can you tell me what is happening?" Mara looked at the papers on the table. She looked at the waveform on her screen, which was still pulsing with that deep, patient rhythm. She thought about how to answer. "I'm not sure yet," she said honestly, "but I think the Earth just introduced itself to someone." There was a long pause on the line. "I'm going to need a fuller explanation," the director said. "I know," Mara said. "Give me a little more time." She hung up and looked at Henrik. He was staring at a new section of signal that had appeared after the handshake. He was pale. "What is it?" she asked. He looked up. "The vault," he said, "just gave us a key. A new layer opened. Mara, I think it wants us to start reading." The diplomatic ship arrived in orbit on a Tuesday morning. It was not what most humans had imagined when they imagined first contact. There were no dramatic flybys over major cities, no burning lights in the sky. One moment there was nothing in Earth orbit, except the usual constellation of satellites and the International Space Station. The next moment there was a ship. It was large, larger than anything humans had ever built, but it was also quiet. It did not fire any weapons. It did not send threatening signals. It simply appeared and then sat there and began broadcasting on every frequency it could find, in dozens of languages, repeating the same short message in each one. "We are here to speak. We mean no harm. Please respond." Earth's governments did not respond calmly. That would have been too much to ask. Military forces were put on alert on 4 continents. Emergency sessions were called in capital cities around the world. Leaders who had been asleep were woken and given briefings that read like the opening pages of a novel no one had wanted to write. But in the small radio telescope station in Ghana, Mara Ose heard the broadcast before the governments did. Her equipment had been tuned to deep space for weeks. She picked up the diplomatic ship's signal the moment it began transmitting. She sat and listened to it loop through its languages. Most of them she did not recognize. But there was one, the 7th or 8th in the sequence, that made her sit forward in her chair. It was the architect language, the same language the vault had been slowly teaching her team for the past week. She understood about a third of it, but she understood enough. "We are here to speak. We mean no harm. Please respond." She typed a short message to her team in the back room. Then she picked up the transmitter, set it to the frequency the ship was using, and pressed the key. "This is Dr. Mara Ose," she said, in the architect language, her pronunciation careful and slow. "I hear you. I am ready to speak." The response came in seconds. The alien voice on the other end of the channel was clearly shaken. She could hear it even through the translation, even across the vast cultural gulf between their species. It was the voice of someone who had expected to wait much longer. The being on the ship was Ambassador Valenis. She was from a species that had evolved in deep ocean trenches on a world with no sun. She had 4 arms, large pale eyes, and a deep attachment to the study of history. She had devoted more than 2 centuries of her life to the architects, to their language, their culture, the scattered fragments they had left behind. She had never expected to hear their language spoken by a living voice. She composed herself. It took a moment. "You speak the old language," Valenis said. "I'm learning it," Mara said. "I've had help." "Who are you? Why are you here?" Valenis told her. Not everything at once. The story was too large and too complicated for that. But the shape of it, the dominion, the vote, the mark that had been placed on Earth, the fleet that had been sent and then stopped, the panic that had swept the galaxy when the vault announced itself. Mara listened without interrupting. She was very good at listening. It was one of the first things Valenis noticed about her. When Valenis finished, Mara was quiet for a while. Outside the station, birds were calling in the trees. It was a warm morning. The sky was its ordinary blue. "You are going to destroy our planet," Mara said finally, "without talking to us, without giving us a chance." "Yes," Valenis said. She did not look away from the camera. "I voted against it, as did my 6 colleagues on this ship. But the council voted yes. I am sorry for that. I am deeply sorry." "I appreciate the apology," Mara said, "but I need to understand something. The only reason you stopped was because of the vault." Valenis was quiet for a moment. "Yes, that is honest." "Then the question is not whether you're sorry," Mara said. "The question is, what happens now?" Over the following 3 days, Mara's team briefed the major world governments, who in turn scrambled to set up a proper official contact framework. There were arguments about who should represent humanity, and how decisions should be made, and whether any agreements had legal standing. Those arguments would go on for years. But in the meantime, everyone agreed that Mara should keep talking. She was already talking. She knew the language. She had earned the trust of the people on the other end. Mara talked to Valenis for hours every day. She asked questions and listened to the answers. She did not pretend to be calm when she was angry, but she did not let her anger make her stop thinking. When she learned about the extinction protocol, about the other 14 planets that had been removed, she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "I want to read those case files, all of them. I want to understand how this decision gets made." Valenis sent the files. Mara read them overnight. By morning she had notes. By afternoon she had questions that Valenis had no good answers for. And every day the vault gave them more. New layers opened as Mara's team demonstrated they could handle what they were reading. The vault had been built with patience. It did not give everything at once. It tested understanding before moving forward. It was, Priya said one evening, like the best teacher any of them had ever had. On the 4th day, Mara sent the Dominion diplomatic ship a message in the architect's own encoded format. It bore her digital signature alongside the vault's authentication mark. It was a complete inventory of what the vault contained, not the contents themselves, but the list of what was there. The inventory took 3 hours to transmit. The diplomatic ship went silent for 11 hours after receiving it. When Valenis came back on the channel, her voice was different, quieter. "You have been inside the vault," she said. "We have been reading for days," Mara said. "We still have a long way to go. But yes. The Council needs to know how much you have accessed." "They can know everything," Mara said. "I'm not hiding anything from anyone. But they should also know something else." She paused. We know what is in there, we know what the architects built, and we know what the failsafe is. The silence on the other end was very long. Are you ready, Mara said quietly, to have a real conversation about what happens next? The vault contained 3 things that changed everything. The first was a record. The architects had kept a complete history of every spacefaring civilization they had observed across billions of years. Not just their own civilization, everyone. They had watched from a distance as species after species pulled themselves out of their home worlds, built ships, spread across their star systems, and eventually reached out to others. They had recorded it all, the triumphs and the mistakes, the wars and the treaties, the species that had risen and fallen before the Dominion existed, and the species that the Dominion had ended. All 14 of them, recorded in full. Names, histories, cultures, achievements. Everything that had been lost was preserved. The second thing was a set of technologies. Not weapons exactly. The architects had moved beyond weapons, in the way a river moves beyond a stone it has long since covered. What they had left behind were tools, tools for energy, tools for space and time, tools for communication across distances that made the Dominion's best equipment look like 2 cups connected by a piece of string. The Vault's technology did not make the Dominion's technology obsolete. It made it irrelevant. The third thing was the Architect Covenant. The Covenant was a legal document, but calling it that felt like calling the ocean a puddle. It was a framework, a set of principles and rights that the architects had built their entire civilization on. Rights of existence, rights of development, rights of self-determination for any species capable of sapient thought. The Covenant granted inheritor rights of the Vault to the species that awakened it. By the Dominion's own founding laws, laws they had based on earlier architect legal fragments, the Covenant had binding authority. By those laws, Earth was untouchable. By those laws, humanity had just become the legal inheritors of the most significant collection of knowledge and technology in the known galaxy. By those laws, everything needed to change. The Dominion Council met in emergency session. It was not like the calm, orderly sessions of before. It was long and loud and sometimes chaotic, and it went on for days. The purists argued. The opportunists recalculated. The fearful sat quietly and did not say "we told you" out loud, though many of them thought it. Admiral Sovrath, still holding position in deep space, sent a message to the council that was later read into the official record. He wrote that he had been prepared to carry out his mission with full professionalism. He wrote that he had no doubt the humans were unusual, even difficult. He wrote that he had looked at the information coming from Earth and thought carefully about what he was seeing. And then he wrote, "Whatever humans are, they are not what we feared. They are something we do not yet have a word for." The council voted again, this time on a different question. The Extinction Protocol, for the first time in Dominion history, was suspended indefinitely. Not for Earth specifically, for all pending cases. 14 planets that had been quietly placed on the list over the past 2 centuries received no notification. They had no idea the vote had ever taken place or that it had just been reversed. They went on with their lives in blissful ignorance of how close the edge had been. The fleet turned around. 47 warships began the long journey back the way they had come. Sovrath stood on his bridge and watched the star charts update. The Sol system fell behind them and shrank to a dot, and then disappeared. He thought about the woman who had answered the diplomatic ship in the architect's own language. He thought about what it must feel like to sit on top of 4 billion years of accumulated knowledge and not know it was there. He thought about what it would mean for the galaxy that the humans knew now. He was not afraid of them. He was not, if he was honest, entirely comfortable either. But he thought that perhaps comfort was not the point. The galaxy had been a certain shape for a very long time, and now it was going to be a different shape. And the only question was whether the beings in it would be wise enough to adjust. On Earth, the adjustment was happening in real time. The world's governments were still arguing about structure and process and authority and representation. That would take years. But something else was happening too. Something quieter and more important. Scientists in every country were being briefed, gradually, on what the vault contained. Engineers and physicists and biologists and historians were receiving access to the architect records, layer by layer, as the vault continued to open itself to its chosen inheritors. They were overwhelmed. They were thrilled. They worked around the clock and forgot to eat and argued with each other at 3 a.m. over interpretations of data that had been sleeping in the Earth's core since before the dinosaurs. In the small station in Ghana, Mara sat at her desk and wrote notes and drank tea that got cold before she finished it. The vault was still teaching her. She felt like a student who had been handed every book ever written and given no time limit. She did not know where to start, and so she started everywhere, a little at a time, and trusted that the shape of it would become clear. Velanis called every day now. They had moved past formal diplomacy into something that felt more like friendship, cautious and new and genuine. Velanis was fascinated by humans in the way a historian is fascinated by a discovery that rewrites everything they thought they knew. She asked questions constantly. Mara answered them honestly, including the parts that were unflattering. The architects believed you were the right species, Velanis said one evening. After everything, after all the history you have had, all the war and the difficulty, they still chose you. Maybe they chose us because of it, Mara said, not in spite of it. Velanis considered this. That thought is either very comforting or very alarming. Probably both, Mara said. That seems to be true of most important things. The formal meeting between humanity's representatives and the Dominion's diplomatic team took place 8 months after the handshake signal. It was held, at Earth's request, at a neutral site, a space station built jointly by both sides in the months leading up to the meeting, which was itself a small miracle of cooperation. The human delegation was large, and argued about everything among themselves, constantly. The Dominion delegation was slightly uncomfortable with the noise, but was doing its best. Mara was not an official delegate. She was listed as an advisor. But when the formal statements had been made, and the legal documents had been reviewed, and the representatives on both sides were ready to talk about what came next, she was the one who spoke. She had written what she wanted to say on a single sheet of paper in her own handwriting. She had kept it simple. "We are willing to share," she said. "We are willing to learn and to teach and to work together on things that matter to all of us. The vault does not belong to humanity. It was left for humanity to open and to share. That is what we intend to do." She paused. "But we will never be marked again. No species will be marked without a conversation first, without being heard. That is not a negotiation. That is a condition." The chamber was quiet. The lead Dominion delegate, an elderly being who had been in diplomacy for over 300 years, looked at Mara for a long time. Then she looked at the paper in front of her, which contained the terms Mara's team had submitted the previous week. She signed it. Outside the station's observation window, the stars were the same stars they had always been, ancient, indifferent, enormous. They had watched civilizations rise and argue and fall, and sometimes, occasionally, managed to become something better than they had been. The stars did not care either way, but the beings looking at them did. In a radio telescope station in Ghana, now mostly empty, a cold cup of tea sat on a desk covered in notes. The waveform on the screen still pulsed, slow and steady. The vault was still there. It would always be there. It had more to say than any lifetime could hold. It was patient. It had always been patient. It had only needed someone willing to listen.